Welcome to the WorkJoy Jam podcast. I'm Beth Stallwood, your host and founder of Create WorkJoy. In this episode, I am joined by Kathryn Palmer-Skillings, who I was introduced to by one of the people who has been on the WorkJoy Way coaching program. And Kathryn has a really interesting background in the world of work as somebody who has always worked with volunteers. And I know that's a subject that a lot of people are really interested in, both because they get a lot of joy from volunteering and because it's a really interesting place to be. And I also asked Kathryn to come on because she has a side hustle, and so many people in our audience, people who are listening here, people I'm talking to, are people who have or who are interested in having a side hustle. And often people talk about having a side hustle and that being the place where they get all their joy from and it makes work okay or bearable. And in Kathryn's case, Kathryn really loves her day job, if you call it that, her employed job, as well as really loving her side hustle. And I thought it's a really interesting study in how you can actually get joy from both and how they can complement each other. And Kathryn has two very different jobs here, but when we talk about her world of work, actually you really see the connection. So I hope you enjoy this episode with Kathryn. I know I did. Hello and welcome to the WorkJoy Jam. I'm really excited for this episode to be joined by the wonderful Kathryn Palmer-Skillings. And we're going to talk about some interesting things around volunteering and around things like your side hustle, but not necessarily just because you don't like your main job, and all kinds of things around inclusion as well. So really excited that Kathryn has joined us today. But before I start asking lots and lots of questions, Kathryn, I would love for you to introduce yourself properly, better than I can, and to tell us a little bit about your story and how you got to where you are today.
Thank you, Beth, and thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to be here on the WorkJoy Jam. So I suppose, how did I get to where I am? So I've spent the last nearly 20 years, I realised the other day, which is slightly terrifying, creating a career that's been really centred mainly around kind of three things: volunteering development, inclusion, and learning and development. So training, learning resources, things like that. And I've done that predominantly in the kind of third sector, so mostly charities, big and small, heritage organisations. So I've been at a museum, and some public body type places, those places you can't ever quite quantify. And and so, but really, all of my career has been about people and people making change and people kind of being authentic to themselves and intentional and just really having a path where they can do something really amazing. And I love that, and I still do that. It's still my full-time day job at a big old national charity, and it gives me huge joy, actually. If that's not too cheesy to say that so soon, it really
You're
does.
allowed to say it right up front about the amount of joy
Good.
you get at
I
work.
have
It's
the
good.
joy. Even on trickier days, I have a lot of joy. And I'm really lucky to be able to do that. And yeah, and I can't ever see myself not doing that, to be honest, right now, especially in case my manager's listening. But so over the years, though, there's always been things that I've been particularly drawn to, and especially I've had this kind of hankering to do something additional, especially around people and inclusion, and maybe having my own kind of business. So having that kind of element of being, kind of out there on my own.
Yeah.
So yes, over the past few years, over many years, I guess now, I've been to lots of weddings, as I'm sure everyone who is, pushing the big 4 has. And quite a few, the last few years, a few of those have been humanist weddings. And I went to one a couple of years ago now of a really dear couple of friends of ours. In fact, my partner was one of the best men. And it was a beautiful wedding, and it was a humanist wedding, and they chose that because they had vastly different kind of cultures and backgrounds and all sorts of kind of things that they wanted to meld together, and they knew that a traditional wedding ceremony just wasn't going to feel authentic. And I sat there and I watched the ceremony and I thought, that's what I want to do. and it wasn't get married again or have another wedding. Had one, thanks.
Don't rule it out.
That's fine. Well, but I really loved that idea of being the person that could create that experience and that could support a couple to create that moment of joy. Actually, at the start of their wedding. So yeah. So now having on top of my day job, I'm now an accredited Humanist wedding celebrant, which means that I create and conduct personalised bespoke wedding ceremonies for couples who want a non-religious ceremony. And in England and Wales, that currently means that I do celebrant-led ceremonies, which at the moment of recording are not legal within England and Wales, unfortunately. But they are legal in Scotland and Northern Ireland and Jersey, in fact. But yeah, we still have a number of couples in England and Wales who choose humanist or celebrant-led because they want that personalised experience. They want to get away from kind of fitting themselves into a box that doesn't quite feel right.
Yeah.
So yeah. So I guess for me, I just love humans and I love people. I love being with people. 2020 was tough, and I think I'm just really passionate about creating those experiences and and marking milestones and all sorts of things. It's all about, for me, it's about that kind of ritual and that celebration.
Amazing. It's such a great story of kind of where you got to. And what I love as well is there's so much assumption made about people who have side hustles is that they do it because they're trying to get out of their day job. So talking to you about this isn't about getting out of your day job because you love your day job and you find lots of joy here, but you find even more joy doing this as well. So it's not a side hustle instead of, it's a side hustle as well as your main job. And I'm really interested, so maybe we'll go down this road for a bit about talking about working with volunteers. And obviously you've been working with volunteers in that world, working with people, working in kind of the third sector or different areas. I'm just really fascinated about this because volunteering has so many benefits to it for organizations who are trying to get stuff done, for the people who benefit from the people who volunteer. But also there's so much research, isn't there, about what volunteers get out of volunteering and how amazing it can be for your own levels of joy. So tell me a little bit more about that world to start with.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right, and it's a kind of mantra that I've led with all through being involved in that world is the idea that it has to be kind of truly mutually beneficial. There has to be something in it for sometimes I think for both parties, sometimes I'd say, well, three parties. So if it's both parties, it's about that but the kind of organisation and the volunteers involved. So it has to work both ways. But also, a great former manager of mine actually in that museum space when I was at London Transport Museum, coolest museum, just gonna say.
I have been there. I enjoyed it much.
I'm a big bus nerd, so you can imagine the excitement, the joy I got every day there. Goodness, but he used to say everything had to be a triple win. It had to work for the communities we were serving, the museum, and the people who were volunteering. And for me, I think that's so important. And you're right in saying there's so much evidence that you can get such joy out of seeing a change you're making, and I think that's really important as well. And understanding that there is usually a kind, not necessarily in every organisation, but there's usually a way to be really involved and to make a great change in some way, whatever your skill set, whatever your motivations, whatever you want to do it. There usually is a way, and it might not be always the most perfect fit in every organisation, but there's a way to do something. And I think that's really important too.
It's so interesting that, and I love that idea of the community, for the museum, for the people, that triple win factor, and the idea that the volunteering can give you joy, and whether that is you're volunteering for a cause that you really care about or something that you kind of totally nerd out about. Like if you're a nerd for buses, I imagine working at the transport museum, like wow, volunteering there could be cool. Or if you love the theatre, volunteering there, there are so many things that you can do. But also this idea, and I love this one because I think I'm always the nerd who puts my hand up for anything like this, is in the work you do right now and the things you're doing in your day job, there are probably opportunities to volunteer and put your hand up to do something like, is it organizing a party? Is it, becoming part of a network or starting a group of people, or, whatever there is, a social sports and social group or something. There's usually something you could put your hand up and get involved in beyond your day job.
Definitely. And I think I am, so I often joke that there needs to be some sort of anonymous group for people like me. I am a compulsive volunteer. I think that's an oxymoron. I literally cannot stop myself. No, probably figuratively. I get told off by amuse literally. Figuratively cannot stop myself, put my hand up. So as well as in my day job, I have obviously my day job, which I'm a learning and development professional. But I also am the network lead for our disabled staff network. I have previously been involved in other kind of networks like that. Right now it's a bit different because of things going on. But yeah, so even in my day job, I have a volunteer role within my day job. And then on top of that, I volunteer outside of work at least 3 places. And I'm a celebrant, which is a freelance career. And technically, I still have an inclusion freelance business. But so I need to put my hand down occasionally, or maybe I don't. And sit on my hands.
Yeah, you're not one of these people who needs to find more time to be able to do other things. You need to find some time to not do anything, by the sounds of it.
Exactly.
But then again, I always think that if the things bring you joy, you find the time for them, right?
Yeah,
you will find
absolutely.
the space for them in your life. It's when these things don't bring you joy that they feel like a burden, or they feel like you don't want to do them anymore.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important to note in this, I hope this is right to say, there have been jobs in the past where I haven't felt the joy. I've seen, I've believed in the cause, I've understood that, and logically that's a good thing. But maybe it was the wrong fit, the wrong organisation. And in those cases, I think it's really important to take that step back and say, it doesn't mean I don't care about this amazing work you're doing as a charity, as a public body, as whatever it is, but this isn't right for me right now. And being able to understand that, because I think some people can feel a bit guilty about that. It doesn't mean you don't care about whatever amazing cause they're serving, of course not, but you also have a right to feel joyful in your day job. It's not about, I think it's not about being a martyr to a particular cause, or thinking you have to go ahead with it. So I think making that change is really important.
For sure. And I love that idea of, you have a right to feel joyful in your day job. You shouldn't have to suffer for a third of your life, basically, which is what you spend at work.
And obviously not all day, every day.
No. So this is so I was about to say we're on the same page here, because like at the beginning we were talking about, you find your work really joyful. That doesn't mean that every hour, every second of every day you're like bouncing around like an excited Tigger, because there's stuff that still annoys you, right? There's still things that aren't as joyful.
Of course. Yeah, and I think that's right. And I think, in fact, as we joined the call, I said to you, I've had a bit of a day. I don't want to miss that, but I still, I still know that I love what I do, and even if I have a bit of a day, I know that obviously it's a Friday when we're calling it. So if tomorrow I was back at work, it won't be as bad tomorrow. There'll be a lovely, wonderful thing that happens. There's still joy that I've got that I'll be doing today in my day job. So there'll be a joyful bit at the end of the day when we have our team get together time. And that's really important. There's always some element of joy to be found, even if some days are less joyful.
Yeah, and like we all have those days where it's less joyful. Sometimes it's because things happen. Sometimes we just get out of bed on the wrong side of bed and we're just grumpy. Some days, like the moon's in the wrong position, if you believe that kind of stuff. Like whatever it is, there are reasons why we don't find it. But I think that the thing we're talking about here is, that tomorrow there'll be better things and you'll be able to enjoy some of those things. That you can create some more of those opportunities if you need to. Like, I always find that if I've had a couple of days where I haven't spoken to many people, I will feel more grumpy than if I go and have a conversation with someone. So booking a conversation makes life easy. Mm-hmm. So it's about finding those things that you find joyful, and they will be different from everybody. Now, you get lots of joy maybe from looking at buses. I would look at it and go, yeah, that's a bus. But there'll be other things that I find loads of joy from. And I was talking to someone this morning about one of the things that I find absolute joy from, which my husband looks at me and goes, what are you doing? Is some like open water, cold water swimming. I find it absolutely amazing. And I told someone about it this morning, and they went, no, just no, no, no. I'm like, well, what floats our boat for joy will be different for each of us.
Of
So find
course.
it and do more of it, and don't be ashamed of it. Like if you love buses and you want to nerd out about buses, go for it, because that's what you like doing.
Yeah, and I think for me that's really central. It's funny. I think especially, um, I, I think just I've got more experienced as well, and I've come to know myself a bit better, and I've done a bit more of that. I guess growth is the word they use, isn't it? That I really realise that if I can align whatever I'm doing to my values and to being authentically me, then I will find joy in it, even if I have a rubbish day. I know, even on my rubbish days, what I'm doing is genuinely making a difference. I know I'm in the right
Yeah.
place, and that's really important. And I think it's almost for me what I get joy from. And again, you realise why 2020 was tricksy. It's almost like it's almost as if I like hosting, but sometimes what I'm literally doing is hosting people in my life or in my job. And that might sound stressful,
Yeah.
but I love that bit. I love making sure everyone's having a great time. I love making sure everyone's included and that has so and so met so and so because actually they could really work really well together and making that connection. And for me, as long as I know I've got those elements, then I absolutely know I'm making a difference. And if I know that my work is either making a difference to the people we serve ultimately, or helping people understand their own value, their own inherent worth, if it's the inclusion piece that I'm doing, then I think that's really key.
I love it. So really connecting there, what's important to you, your values around making a difference, making people feel included, connecting people together. If you can do all that and use your skills of hosting at the same time, you're kind of in the tick, 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 ding, ding, I
Yeah,
like this world.
yeah, absolutely.
And it's interesting you say there about kind of the growth journey I think it takes us, well, it certainly took me, although I am a total nerd for work, so I do love to work and I always have done, which is probably why I find the WorkJoy thing a real passion of mine. But it takes a while, I think, in the world of work to really set up who you are. So there's a lot of talk about being authentic and living to your values and stuff, but they don't just magically come to you when you first start work. You really have to explore them, and you learn through living through the things that you do like, living through some stuff that you don't like,
Yeah.
you know, great colleagues, you learn from them. You might learn from great bosses, or you learn just as much, I think, from bosses who aren't so great and organizations where the fit isn't quite right, to navigate yourself to probably where you are now, which is knowing yourself well enough to know the kind of things that you need to be working on.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's really important, and it might sound counterintuitive on a kind of what joy podcast, so that I think it's almost important. It's not preferable and you don't enjoy it at the time, but to be in situations that you know are very, very wrong. And I have been in those where I think actually, where that's triggered my dislike for unfairness or inequality and all stuff like that, and I've seen it happen or felt it happen. And when you're in it, it's very easy to think, oh, well, maybe it is me, and to not really to not really get yourself out of that. But I think once you do, and you look back on it, while it might have been very difficult at the time, I think it's really enabled me to go, well, actually, I'm not going to put myself back in that situation ever if I can help it, and
Yeah.
hopefully I would recognise that again sooner and make a
Yeah.
change. And whatever that change is, it can be speaking out, it can be getting extra support, it could be, in extreme cases, moving on. Who knows? But it's about recognizing that that there is joy to be had and finding how we can navigate out of that. If that makes sense.
And I often think that if we take all of those experiences where we have struggled, like, if you're in the wrong organization and it takes you a while to work that out, or if the role doesn't quite suit you and you need to think about, is there a different role here? Because I love this workplace, is you kind of have to go through it to understand it. You can't look at it in advance and go, yeah, that's not going to work for me, so I just won't go there. You have to experience it,
Mm,
right?
absolutely. Yeah, I don't, and I think equally, on the flip side, you might really see something and go, I'm really not sure about that, but I'll try, and then have a really great experience. And,
Yeah.
and I think it can work both ways, and I've certainly experienced it both ways. And I think that's really important, like you say, the experience is just important, I think, to be a bit transport nerdy about it. It's partly journey, not just destination, and that used to be somewhere written when I was at the museum. And
Yeah.
but I think it's really true. I think it's about experiencing that and getting through that and understanding what you can take from it, and it does open other opportunities as well. So I know I wouldn't be as personally, I don't think I would be as strong in my inclusion headspace if I hadn't had some experiences that were less than inclusive.
Yeah.
So
And that's it, isn't it? It's like you then sometimes find your passion for it and find your, actually, this is something I want to work towards having more of, because
yeah.
I felt the negative end of that personally, or I've experienced some of those things that I don't like. So lovely segue, because I literally wrote down the word inclusion and said, right, so here we go. Nicely done, Kathryn.
Oh,
Is
I am pleased.
let's segue into your passion around inclusion. And I'd love to know from you, obviously you've experienced some of those things where you don't feel included, and that's a really horrible feeling. But also how you're interested in that world and how it's driving what you do both in your paid job and what you do in your wonderful side hustle as a celebrant.
So I think for me, it drives me because it's what I live every day as a fully card carrying disabled person with a capital D. Um, then actually for me that's really important. It's what what I experience, and it's how I view the world and how I perceive things around me. It's how people perceive me, and I'm proud of that, and I think that's really important to kind of say out loud.
Yeah.
And for me, what that does mean though is I truly believe in. So there's two ways of thinking, and there's always debate on this, and I'm not about to go into the huge, theoretical bits of it. But ultimately, the way I look at things is much more in line with something called the social model, which views uh, disability or being disabled as essentially a context-dependent situation. So I have, and not everyone will look at it this way. This is my way, so I'm owning it. And it's about I have an impairment. I have a, in terrible terminology, like a bit that is different, you could say. So I have that. That is standard. That doesn't move. That doesn't shift and change. That for me, that's a fact, and it's not a bad thing, and it's not a good thing. It's just a thing. It's like being brunette. It's like having brown eyes, whatever. But what happens is the reason I experience things that aren't inclusive is because actually the context around me isn't always accessible. It's not always built to include everyone. Systems, processes, spiral staircases to lose in the pub. Always my
Yeah.
favourite. Why put it in a pub of all places? But anyway, um, well, everyone's wobbly, but especially. But things like that. So the bit of me that's different isn't going to change, and that's fine. I'm cool with that. What can change and what should change is the context around you, and to kind of put that into perspective, if I can. So back in the day, I used to work at Scope, and I had a colleague who I would see in the office who was paralysed from kind of halfway down his chest downwards, and well, it still would be in an accessible office, I'm sure. I know I've not been there for a few years, but at the time, Scope's office was hugely accessible and really kind of forward thinking. And this chap, who was a full time wheelchair user, and a lot of people, I think, if you didn't know, you'd look at him and go, well, he's disabled. He's a disabled person. He used to quite openly say that as soon as he came into the Scope office, he wasn't disabled anymore. He could do everything he needed to do on an equal level with others, not in the same way as others, but on an equal level. So actually, he's still got the paralysis, that ain't going anywhere, but his disabledness, for want of a better word, lessens and it is context dependent. So
Yeah.
that's how I always view things. Like I'm I'm not that fussed about having an impairment. There, I said it. But I'm really fussed when stuff is actually built to make my life difficult. That's really frustrating. And there's enough ableism going around to, that there's enough happening so that it does exist. And I take that and I say that I also know that in a privileged position. I'm a white, cisgendered woman in the Western world who's disabled. therefore I'm on, I do check my foliage and I understand it. I'd have much harder time if I was intersectioning in any other way. But yeah, so that's kind of, I spoke on that more than I meant to, but but that's kind of the perspective I look at. So the reason that drives me is then I think, well, actually, that's what drives me. Everything I do should be able to flex. Everything I do should be designed. My day job, every course I design, every resource I make for learning, every experience for learning for any volunteer should be able to entirely flex to make sure it fits whatever need they have. And that's not just disabled people. All humans have access requirements. Someone find me a human who doesn't have one.
Yeah.
Because if you define that as being something that makes you access your life and enjoy your life and get on with things and perform to your best, then actually you could argue how you take your tea is an access requirement.
Yeah.
And once you get to, I'm being a little bit facetious, but I use that example in inclusion training because everyone has things that they need to make them feel healthy and safe and included. And the difference is some have been kind of normalized and some have been seen as being really specific. So when I'm looking at my day job, I'm trying to make sure that everything I do can offer that experience. And in celebrancy, I think it's an even bigger opportunity because the wedding industry is starting to try and be better, but it's still filled with ableism. And that's not necessarily active people trying to be horrible, obviously, but it's that kind of casual underlying everyday ableism, to steal a phrase, that does exist. And I think when you have a celebrant-led wedding, your ceremony, the whole point is it's bespoke. So what better way to make sure you have a ceremony that's fully accessible to you as a couple? And I say fully accessible to that couple because obviously, well, maybe not obviously, nothing can be fully accessible to everyone because everyone has individual needs. So it's about always being really flexible and always responding to the people involved. And that's, I think, really important. And I look at kind of how, and this isn't to have a go at other ways of getting married, of course not. But it is tricky if you have specific needs for your ceremony to make you feel safe, and the person that's going to conduct that ceremony is someone you meet 10 minutes beforehand. It's very hard to kind of get across to them with everything else going on when they don't know you, all of that stuff that you need them to know to be able to support you through that day. So it could be that you might be feeling quite overwhelmed. It could be that if you're neurodiverse, you need to be considering temperature changes and things like that. It could be that you need to sit a certain way or stand a certain way or whatever it is. It's almost impossible. Whereas with being a celebrant, you work with that couple for however long, they're kind of from when they book you to their ceremony, you work with them, you get to know them, you understand them, they understand you. Really importantly, it's a two-way thing, and so you can entirely make sure that ceremony works for them. And also you can, quite frankly, chuck all the tradition out the window, all those should-haves. Oh, well, you should do this, you should do that. Nah, get in the bin.
It's amazing, and I'm just really interested in this whole world because I got married nearly 10 years ago, so it's quite a while ago, and I had no idea that a celebrant-led wedding was a thing at this time. And it was either you got married in a church or you got married with a registrar. They were the two options that I knew about. And I remember thinking, oh, hang on, this ceremony is going to be like 15 minutes long by the time you go through it. That's really short. I would want a bit more. I don't want a church ceremony, but I don't want this. And it was quite hard, and it is quite set up in a weddings are quite set up in a standard way, I think, in a lot of places. And even going to venues and stuff, and we won't go too down into the deep dark depths of my wedding, people are like, well, you'll do this, then you'll do that, then you'll do that. And I was like, I don't want to do it that way. And they were like, oh, well, that's how we set up our packages. And I was like, no, that's not how I want to do it. And they all looked at me like I was insane. I was like, no, I don't want to do it like that. So I'm really interested that as a non-disabled person, I feel what you're saying here, but I can imagine and feel like, yeah, actually, I had some what you call the kind of T-based access needs, not a disability-based access need. at that time, and I didn't feel like my needs were met. And now I'm sitting here kind of considering, if I did have some kind of impairment or a need that was more serious, then I don't want it like that. How important it would be to be able to experience what is supposed to be, the most joyful day of your life, or one of those most joyful days of your life. Actually, it could be really unjoyful if you're not feeling like your needs are being met.
Absolutely. And I think that's the thing. I think it's really important at this point to point out that obviously I'm talking about how I particularly try and make sure that my service is inclusive to disabled people, but I work with all couples, and that's why I work with all couples, because all couples quite often, not all, but all couples who end up having a celebrant-led ceremony, that's what brings them to it, because they suddenly go, there is this other way, there is a third way. And yes, at the minute in England and Wales, that means that you pop along to a registry office and say some legally required words separately, but I work with couples to help them find a way to do that feels right and that's still joyful, and it isn't kind of, we don't have to hide it away and there's some sort of shameful thing that we have to do the legal bit. But it's about saying, well, for some people you might want to go and do the kind of what we call a statutory ceremony. So that's where you literally sit down, it's like a meeting, you have two people there, you say the words, you don't need to swap rings, you do it also, you literally get married, kind of, you say those words, certificate is signed, that's your legal bit. Some people, they want to do it like that because that's almost like getting a license. It's a bit like equating it to, you might register the birth of a child, but then you have a christening in a religious setting. No one goes to the christening and goes, well, you already registered them. That doesn't count.
It doesn't count, does it?
Like, what for? So I like using that as an example because, some couples do say to me when we're chatting through the process, they go, well, if someone on the day says it isn't our real wedding, and I just think, well, they say it in front of me. but actually someone might one day say that, and it's about understanding that it will feel it will be a real wedding. It won't even just feel like one. It is your real wedding. You might have got a license essentially for it by stamping a certificate somewhere else. And other people, they want to make a bit more of a celebration of that legal bit, and that's amazing as well. So you might do the evening, the last bit of the day, you might go and do it on a 5 o'clock and then have cocktails afterwards, or you might do it on a Monday morning and then go have brunch. There are loads of ways to make that work. But more and more couples are looking at, I think, at those standard options, and even now, there's nothing overtly terrible about any of those options, but they just might not fit. They might not essentially make you feel joyful. They might feel a little bit patriarchal to many of us, even if they're not meant to, and it might just not. It's like having something that doesn't quite make you feel comfortable. It's about making sure that that's not what you're experiencing in that moment.
Yeah. And I was just sitting here really reflecting on, if we take the whole thing about this flexibility to help people feel included, to help people feel comfortable, safe, healthy, all of those different factors. And if we plonk all of that stuff back in the workplace, I'm really interested here to think about, actually, if we took a more person-centered approach, a more individual approach to how we sometimes run workplaces, we could actually create a lot more joy for people in their working lives.
Yeah, absolutely. I think having that person-centered approach is really key. Like, it's interesting because even just having that freedom to work more flexibly and in a way that suits people, I think there'll be a lot more of that going forward. I can't imagine any organisation kind of suddenly going back to, well, hopefully someone, but going back to exactly how it was. We always travelling at the same time, roughly,
with everyone else in the world.
Exactly, and sit somewhere, because even though, and so I've always been, not always, but in my current organisation for the last 4 years, I've been a home worker. So when this happened, it was quite interesting because everyone turned to me and went, "Oh, you've done this," and I was like,
"Yeah."
I was like, "This is not home working. This is working at home while there's a crisis outside. This is a very different situation. It's not the same thing." And I think that's really important to recognise. But the reason I talk about that is that previously, as the slightly, I want to say anomalous, is that the word? Anomalous home worker.
It sounds right.
About right. The anomaly. There we are. I'm trying
Yeah.
to conjugate that word. So whereas most of my team were office-based and I was home-based, it, I would sometimes go in because there was an hour meeting that someone didn't think it would work if I joined by Skype/Teams/Zoom, whichever one you're using. And I think, so I schlepped it in for that hour. And then I'd get there and it only take 40 minutes. And I'm done twice out to get there, both ways. And you kind of think, oh, and now, I'm not having a go about going into work. I see some people I'd connect, that was lovely. But now you think, well, actually, isn't it better that hopefully going forward we'll be able to go when we need to, not just because we have to, and find ways to use those spaces better and also in a more equitable way. So we're a UK-wide organisation, and quite often we drag everyone to London for a meeting. Ah. And now we've all said, even when we go back to the offices, can we just, if we do a big team meeting, we've all agreed it's going to stay on Teams because it's such a better, everyone's kind of got an equal experience then. And it just makes so much better, and it's much more person centered. If you need to pop away and have 10 minutes because you know that's what you need to do, then it works much better.
Yeah.
If you can't travel that day, or if something happens and the nursery shuts, and you might be able to cope with being on a call bouncing a toddler, but you couldn't have stretched it halfway. Exactly.
Yeah.
So I think it's really key to look at that.
And even like, I think even beyond like the working hours or the way you work, but also things like, and I might get into trouble with some of my HR colleagues on this one, is even when we look at things like HR policies and processes, which are very much based on a kind of cookie cutter, this is how it is from here to here, and you get this or you get that doesn't really, I mean, the good organizations with the great HR people, and there are many of them out there, and I think they're all brilliant, is so often they're taken as, this is it, this is what you have, versus, but this doesn't work for me. And it's about, how do we flex to understand individual situations and lives, and what works for them and what doesn't work for them, so that you can make it right. And that's not to say that, because I don't believe this anyway, that most people absolutely will not take advantage of that. They will use those things when they need them, if they're there and available for them. So I think there is something around, how do we help make those things happen, and how do we really think about people and their individual needs. And I really loved your take on, and I'm going to take it away with me definitely and think about it, your take on that everyone has individual accessibility needs. It's just that some people have an impairment that makes that happen, and some people just need it because they like their tea that way, or because it works in their life because of those things. And I think if we all thought that way on different scales of those, we'd probably be a lot more accessible for everybody.
Absolutely. Yeah, I often say that. I think, and I think it's interesting looking back at the last year that a lot of the stuff that I know, I've got friends, where I work is amazing for my personal access. I've got friends in other organisations that have been asking for home working for how long, because they need it. And then the second everyone needs it, and they kind of look at that and go, oh wow, but look how much better it was for everyone.
Yeah.
I mean, some people, they struggle, I get it, and not home working isn't for everyone, but for a lot of people it has brought better work-life balance, it has meant better energy levels. And it is interesting that some of the things that quite often are the key things that get asked for mutual adjustment requests are the things that have happened in 2020. And they happen pretty quickly then for a lot of places. It's like, oh, interesting.
It's so true. And the one person who's asked for like 1 day's worth of flexible working a week or something like that, and it's been turned down and turned down and turned down, and then the next day it's no, you're working from home for an entire year, and everybody's doing it. Oh, and look, isn't it wonderful? It's like, I could have proven it was wonderful.
Yeah, exactly. So I think if we understood that everyone has stuff that makes their life easier, or stuff that makes them healthier or safer, or however you want to phrase it, then actually we'd go a long way to sorting a lot of things out.
I love that. I love that approach. And I think it's a really great one to think about inclusion and how we can help other people, as well as thinking about what are their needs in this situation. What is that context we're working in now? Does this make them feel comfortable? Does it make them feel healthy? I think it's a really, really amazing way of looking at things and helping them to get more joy in
Yeah.
their work life as well. So how can we be the facilitators of that? So whether that's you thinking about how do you do your training, or a manager thinking around how do we do this meeting to make sure it feels right for everybody? How do we do that? How do we do this? I think that's a really great bit of advice. We could probably talk for hours and hours, Kathryn, because we love a good chat.
Yeah.
But I'm going to move us on now, if it's okay with you, to some quick fire questions. Are you ready?
I am ready.
I would love to know, for you personally, and we've heard a little bit about buses and people, so we know that already, but I'd love to know, like, in your work, what is one thing that's always guaranteed to bring you some work joy?
For me, it is seeing almost like the light go on when someone realises the difference they can make. So especially that goes back to really my years of working with volunteers. When someone realises they made that difference, or they could make that difference, and they feel empowered to do it, that's why I do what I do.
Love it. Such a great feeling, isn't it, when you see that light up in somebody. What book are you currently reading?
So I'm currently reading 3. Is that allowed?
Yeah, of course, of course. Multiple reading is
Yeah.
fine.
So the one I'm reading for my book club is David Copperfield, Charles Dickens, because we've never actually read it in our group. How bizarre! But to give me a bit of, I say light relief, not so light. I'm also reading How to Be a Liberal by Ian Dunt, and even light relief is Quite by Cordelia Winkleman, who is my absolute girl crush. So
Love it,
so
of
yeah.
course, yeah.
Yeah.
Love it. Great range there, from some classics there to some nice modern stuff as well. So fantastic. And we will put those in the details as well, so people can link to them. What is the best or most useful bit of advice that you've had in your life that you always find yourself coming back to?
So I've got 2 really short ones, if that's right. So the first one is progression, not perfection, which I know lots of people say, but I have to. Funny enough, I have a card on it above my desk that says it. If I allow myself, I would try and not do it until I know it's going to be absolutely right. Sometimes I just need to start it, and so that's one really. And the other one, a nice transport related one, is ignore the directions at King's Cross. If you want to get out, go the opposite way. and I think that's actually, it's funny because it sounds like I'm just about transport, but I think it works really well for loads of stuff. Why are you just following where someone tells you should go? It's sometimes quicker the other direction.
Yeah, or sometimes in the other direction, you'll find something new that you hadn't experienced before. Like if you go there, you might find a new shop or cafe or something
Exactly.
in that way.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And being somebody who has not even just zero, but like negative amounts of the ability to direct myself. I do not have any kind of internal compass or understanding. And even though I lived in London for 6 years, whenever I got out of a tube station, wherever it was, I always walked in the wrong direction. That, in some cases, has made me cry a lot when I've got lost. And in other cases, has brought me massive amounts of joy because I'm like, oh, I never knew this was here. That's quite exciting. So, either way, you can find good things. Okay. Next question is, can you give our listeners one super practical, go and do it today, tomorrow, the next day, build it as a habit, bit of advice or guidance for how they can get some more joy in their lives?
So I thought about this, and I have to admit I struggle with this one, but I thought, for me, I think it's about saying hello to someone whose work you love, and that could be something on social media. It could be chatting to someone in another bit of your organisation, or popping like a coffee in on Teams or in real life one day. But it's just about, I think saying hello and telling someone, I really like what you did there, and it feels like you're giving someone else joy, but I think it helps to build those connections. And it's amazing what that can start to do.
Yeah, that's a great bit of advice. I love that. And sometimes just, if you are scrolling on social media, it's so easy, isn't it, to be a lurker rather than going, oh, I love that. I'm just going to tell you that.
Yeah.
And imagine the joy on someone else's face when they see something like that come up. And also that just makes you smile as well, doesn't it? Because you love it. So
Exactly.
I love that. Really great bit of advice. So before we finish off, where is it that people can find out more about you, Kathryn?
So, you can probably find me mostly. I am on LinkedIn, but I've got a very long name, so you can probably find me easier on things like Instagram, where I am KPS_celebrant, and on Facebook I'm the same. I've obviously got a website as well, which is celebrantKathryn.com, but you have to spell the Kathryn Kathryn. Only the one vowel, no superfluous vowels in my name, I've discovered.
You're not going free on those vowels in your name there. Great. And what we will do as well, Kathryn, is to pop those into the show notes on the Instagram and all our social media as well, so that people can just click over the link rather than having to remember how to spell everything.
Yeah.
It's been fantastic having you on today. I've really enjoyed this delving into the world of when you're working with or being a volunteer, and how kind of putting your hand up and doing something that you really care about can make such a big difference in your life and in other people's. And that just brings so much joy. And also, what a great conversation about inclusion and how we can all really think about what is it that people need to feel happy, safe, joyful, healthy in their work. And I think it is something that we can all take away. So thank you so much for joining us on the WorkJoy Jam.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been so much fun.
Thanks, Kathryn. Thank you for listening to the episode with Kathryn. I think she's got a really interesting background and perspective on things, and there are so many bits I could pick out, both from her work with volunteers and her work as a celebrant, which is a really interesting area and probably a job I hadn't really ever thought about before. One thing I think is really interesting when I talk to Kathryn is when she talks about inclusion, and I know it's something that so many of us are trying to work on being better at. And one of the things that really stuck with me is this idea that when you think about access and you think about how people experience things, is that everybody actually has access needs. And her description of like, how do you like your cup of tea, really resonated with me as, let's just think about this in the simplest possible way. How do we help make it possible for people to have what they need to do really great work? And if you are working in an organisation or you're responsible for helping make inclusion happen, sometimes I think it is about, let's just step back for a moment and think about how do we help people who need some support with access. And that might look different for lots of different people, but there are so many things that we can do, and to move into a more friendly, caring about, caring for world where people who do have different needs are really, really well supported. And the idea here about, being flexible and helping people to have what they want and what they need and making choices. And I especially love Kathryn's phrase here, and it's one that I use all the time, is the advice of like, aim for progress, not perfection. Progress, not perfection. Because perfection, I think, in the real world doesn't really exist. If we're always aiming for it, we're probably always going to be slightly disappointed. But what can we do in terms of making progress happen? How could we move even one tiny little bit further forward in what we want to do? And I think that's also a really good way, when we're coming back to that point that Kathryn's making around inclusion and making it right and able for everybody to take part in whatever we're doing at work or beyond, is let's make some progress there and not wait to start something because we're aiming for perfection. So that's going to be something that I keep in mind when I'm looking at my work and my life going forwards. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. If you do want to find more out about Kathryn, do look in the show notes for the links to her. We also have the WorkJoy platform, www.createworkjoy.com, if you want to find more about our programs like the WorkJoy Way, the 16-week coaching program, and our upcoming development of a great community of people, the Club WorkJoy. We are also on the socials if you want to follow us for more information to keep up to date. We're on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at Create WorkJoy. Thank you very much for listening today. Do go and have a listen to some of the other episodes.